Mr. Driller on the Game Boy Color. Now, despite its title, this is a sequel of sorts to Dig Dug. If you ignore the fact that there was a sequel to Dig Dug called Dig Dug 2. And that there was also another sequel to Dig Dug called New Dig Dug on the Game Boy. And Dig Dug Arranged on the GameCube, and like 4 other Japanese exclusive PC Dig Dug sequels. Ignoring all of that, this one is a sequel to Dig Dug, and similarly to the aforementioned Dig Dug 2, this game has very little to do with Dig Dug. In fact, it has even less, because Dig Dug 2 still had Pukas, Figars, and, of course, Dig Dug. This game doesn't even have that, and the reason is, the entire story is blocks are rising up from beneath the dirt, and the world needs a hero. But unfortunately, Dig Dug is too old for this shit, so they send his son, Mr. Driller, instead. Although I will give him credit, he's at least a snappy dresser, and slightly less psychotic. I mean, you're not going to find inflating people to death with bike pumps in this game. Although that is kind of a downside. Crap. Its gameplay initially is very simple. Essentially, you have a bunch of blocks underneath you need to drill to the bottom. The blocks are colored various colors, and if 2 colors are touching each other, when you drill one of them, they will both be destroyed. Any spare space above you that prior blocks existed in will start falling towards you. So you need to constantly be moving in order to not be crushed by stuff above you. But that's not the only challenge Mr. Driller faces, because you have to deal with oxygen supplies. It's a constantly draining thing, and unless you constantly get topped up with oxygen tanks that are located periodically around the giant blocky death maze, you will suffocate. And of course, we also have these evil chocolate bricks, because if you drill these, you lose 20 oxygen. And more importantly, in later levels, oxygen tanks are actually surrounded by these. So if you try to drill one of these in order to get the oxygen tank, you will actually lose as much oxygen as you'd be earning, in addition to the oxygen you're naturally draining. So while this game is a very basic concept of simply drill straight down to the bottom, it becomes a lot more of a on-the-fly strategic pathfinding simulation. Essentially, you have to find the most efficient path to the bottom of the world without getting crushed before you lose your oxygen, and while somehow freeing oxygen tanks from their cages of chocolate. Typically by dropping other bricks on top of them, which means you also have to take into account where the bricks on top of you that are falling down are going. So, while this game initially seems very simple, it can actually get pretty intense once you get going. And I really desperately hope that's enough to hold your interest, because that's it. This game is kind of the definition of bare bones. Essentially, you have that one gameplay style, 3 variants of it, which are literally the exact same game, the only difference being the target depth that you need to attain to finish, one of which being an endless mode for challenges and stuff, and that's it. Later games would add different characters, different modes and stuff, but this one unfortunately just has the most basic of gameplay elements here. That said, if you are interested in the sheer arcadiness of it, it will satisfy you. But if you're looking for more, you're going to want to look at later releases in the series, because this game is not going to be doing that for you. Now, the overall presentation to Mr. Driller is... it's okay. Visually, there's only like 3 tile sets for the bricks, and your character doesn't look bad or anything, but he doesn't look terribly interesting either. And audio-wise, it's really not interesting. It's very forgettable, and I mean that in the most genuine sense possible, because I honestly remember none of it. It kind of worked for what it needed to do, I guess, but honestly, the gameplay is going to be what's got your attention here, and not how it's presented to you, because the presentation, I won't say it falls flat, but it's hardly going to stand out. Now, if you want a copy of Mr. Driller on the Game Boy Color, it's about $15. It's not super common or anything, but given that pretty much everything after the Game Boy Color was also region-free, you could just import any number of sequels this game got that have more content, cheaper, and the only difference being the language, which, it being an arcade game, probably isn't all that important. That said, if you want this specific version, $15 is honestly a bit high. I would say 5, maybe 10 if you want to push it. But while this game is fun while it lasts, unless you're into score attacking and just the arcadey aspect of it, it's not going to hold your attention for super long due to its sheer bare bones nature. And for $15, that just seems like it's asking too much. But that said, if you really are genuinely interested in arcadey style games and you don't mind its lack of additional features or whatever, $15 it's an okay price, I guess. I would still say try and find it cheaper or get one of the many sequels that came out at less money and are typically easier to find, but still, at the end of the day, Mr. Driller isn't a bad game, it's just very much outclassed by every one of its games that spawned from it. And ironically, all the many games that preceded it, because, I mean, let's just be honest here, Dig Dug and all the many Dig Dug sequels were frickin' awesome because Dig Dug. I mean, seriously, it's easily one of the top 5 best arcade games ever made. So go get Dig Dug, go get many sequels to this game maybe, but maybe skip this one unless it really looks interesting to you.